In this video, I will be going over monetary policy. I will be explaining contractionary and expansionary monetary policy, the monetary multiplier, excess and required reserves, demand deposits, the difference between a single bank and a commercial banking system, and last but not least, the federal fund rate. I'll also be going over a small scenario. I'm going to start off this video by defining the federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is the interest rate that banks charge one another for overnight loans. Question: if the Federal Reserve wants to lower the federal funds rate, what open market operation would be appropriate? What are open market operations? Open market operations are the buying and selling of securities in the open market by the Fed. If the Fed buys bonds, it takes bonds out of the economy and replaces them with money. Now, if the Fed sells bonds, it takes money and gives the security to the investor. I am now going to explain what happens in expansionary and contractionary monetary policies, and this will lead us to our answer. The question was, if the Federal Reserve wants to lower the federal funds rate, what open market operation would be appropriate? Here we have an overview of expansionary versus contractionary policy. We're going to first start off with expansionary. Expansionary policy, also known as easy money, is used for a recession. In this policy, the Fed buys bonds. The reserve requirement will decrease, discount rate will decrease, bank reserves will increase, money supply will increase, and federal funds rate will decrease. The federal funds rate decreases when the Fed buys bonds in an expansionary policy. If the Federal Reserve wants to lower the federal funds rate, the Fed will buy bonds. Now we're going to move on to contractionary policy, also known as tight money used for inflation. In a contractionary policy, the Fed sells bonds. The reserve requirement will increase, the discount rate will increase, bank reserves will decrease, money supply will decrease, and federal funds rate will increase. Now that I have finished going over contractionary and expansionary monetary policies, we're going to move on to a scenario. Assume that the Fed buys bonds equals to 10 million. If the required reserve ratio was 0.2, calculate the maximum change in loans throughout the banking system. In order to understand this problem, you need to understand the difference between a single bank and a commercial banking system. A single bank can create money by the amount of its excess reserves. A banking system as a whole can create money by a multiple of the excess reserves. So what is a multiple of the excess reserves? A multiple of excess reserves is the money supply. You multiply the monetary multiplier times ER, which equals expansion of money. The equation for monetary multiplier is 1 over the reserve requirement ratio. Now back to the scenario. We're looking for the total money supply since it says banking system. The first thing we look for is required reserves. To find the required reserves, you multiply demand deposits times required reserve ratio, which will give you 2 million. Next, we have to find the excess reserves. Demand deposits minus required reserves equals the excess reserves. So 10 minus 2 million equals 8 million. The maximum change in loans throughout the banking system equals the money supply. The excess reserves are 8 million and the monetary multiplier is 5. You multiply those two to get the total money supply, which is 40 million. If the Fed buys bonds, what would happen to the nominal interest rate? When there's a recession, the Fed decreases the reserve requirement ratio. During a recession, the Fed buys bonds, which will lead to the nominal interest rate decreasing based on other factors. This concludes my video over monetary policy. Thanks for watching. I hope you have learned something.